So yeah, maybe we can get into some more specifics now. So I get a lot of questions from learners about like reading methods, like how they can go about reading, if they should just read it casually like they would in a native language, or if there's any special like language learning hacks maybe. So do you have any advice as to how
Yeah,
to read these books?
absolutely. But it does depend on the level a little bit. So the way that I normally characterize this is if you are still in the early stages, then you're going to be reading something many times over, lots of repetition. Because if you read one chapter of a story, you're going to understand something. If you go back and read it again, you're going to understand a little bit more. And every time you repeat that chapter, you're going to notice more things. So at the early stages, I recommend that you repeat lots and lots. But then as you get more advanced, then you're going to repeat a lot less and eventually get to a point where you're just reading for pleasure and you don't repeat at all. So early stages, lots of repetition. Later stages, reading just like you would in your mother tongue. Because the ultimate goal, what we want to try and get to, if you ask yourself the question, well, how did I learn my native language? You learn your native language obviously by speaking with your parents, but also by reading lots of books at school to study, but also books at home. And so the ultimate goal learning a foreign language it would be to read just like you do in your native language, just for pleasure. Now you could say, well, shouldn't you study some of the stuff in those books? Shouldn't you study the vocabulary or try to memorize the vocabulary, put them into flashcards, or try to study the grammar? And you can do that. But the problem is that as soon as you enter what I call study mode, so as soon as you start to kind of try to memorize vocabulary and study what you're reading, it takes up all of your time. So what we have as learners is a choice between, do I just keep reading and read and read and read and read? Or do I try to study what I've been reading? And for me, over the long term, the big prize really is to just read as much as possible, because reading is a form of natural repetition. So you mentioned flashcards earlier, for example. One of the things that flashcards do is they help you repeat vocabulary, so they bring them back over and over again, because the more times you repeat the vocabulary, the more you're likely to learn or memorize or remember it. But reading, as my friend Anthony calls it, is natural space. He calls it space repetition reading, not space repetition, but space repetition reading. Because if you keep reading, guess what? You're going to see those words over and over again anyway, which means you'll naturally learn them. So what I tend to encourage people to do as much as possible is try to gradually stop studying. Studying is something you do as a beginner. Eventually you want to move to a place where you're not studying at all, you're just reading for pleasure, because then you'll read so much and you'll consume so much that it's impossible not to learn. So that's the kind of big idea. Is there any part of that that you'd like to kind of drill into in more detail?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's really fascinating. I mean, this is a problem that I'm always kind of debating with myself, because I have like a little bit of a reading session every morning in my languages, and I want to get into it. I mean, it's like topics that I enjoy, but then I come across some words like, oh, what does this mean? What does this mean? And I find it's more just I'm spending more time in the dictionary than I am in the text. So
Exactly.
so perhaps I need to take your advice and focus more on the actual text and the enjoyment. But I
Well,
mean,
there's two parts
yeah,
to this, right? So the most important thing when you're reading is to choose a text that is at the right level for you. So students might know this as the idea of comprehensible input. Because if you choose something that's too hard for you, then you don't understand anything. So you have to look stuff up in the dictionary. But if you can choose something at your level, that means that you already understand enough. You can follow the plot, so you can follow the gist. And then at that point, you don't have to look in the dictionary because you already understand enough. So then you can say to yourself, right, okay, I know, yes, there are a few words that I don't understand, but I'm just going to be strong and I'm not going to look them up because I know that I can follow the main idea. So I'm just going to keep reading and enjoy the plot. And then that's the best. the best combination. The number one reason that people struggle with reading is because they choose material that's far too hard for them. So you've got to stay away from the dictionary as much as possible, and the best way to do that is by choosing material at the right level for you.
Yeah, I guess that's exactly where your books would come into play, like, and as
Exactly.
you make more as well, because that's what I find so hard is just I mean, a lot of the more lower level books are just kind of fairy tales and that kind of stuff. And then the stuff that you're interested in is just at your native level. So it's quite hard to find the middle ground.